After 8 long years in development, multiple delays, tons of hype, and unfortunate crunch time, Cyberpunk 2077 is finally out. And while initially it was met with positive reception across the board from early reviews, now that it's fallen into the hands of consumers, the narrative around the game and CD Projekt Red is slowly shifting. It's really apparent that this game just wasn't ready to be released quite yet. Cyberpunk executes a lot of things very well, and I can say that overall I like the game a whole lot. It's just littered with bugs and poor optimization, and some features feel underdeveloped as hell. Don't worry, I won't be spoiling things in the game's story until much later in the video, and I'll show a nice seizure-free warning when spoilers are coming. Visually speaking, Cyberpunk 2077 is absolutely incredible. The environments, characters, and weapons all look fantastic. Sure, it's not really on par with a game like Red Dead Redemption 2, but Cyberpunk is absolutely gorgeous if you can get it to run right. The Cyberpunk aesthetic is always a treat, and this game's art style nails the vibe just right to immerse you immediately. The music is also outstanding. Both the original score and the radio music are so thematic, atmospheric, and amazing to listen to. I've been bumping this game's music in my daily life since its release, and honestly it's fantastic on its own. A$AP Rocky, Run the Jewels, and Grimes and many more have their own original music, and they're all absolute bangers. Starting off the game, I already had some red flags raised. The character customization in Cyberpunk is deep, don't get me wrong, but it's certainly not as crazy as they were advertising. Where are the height and weight sliders? The tattoos are really lacking. There isn't a whole lot of variety in the scars, cyberware, and skin complexion options either, which is disappointing because I wanted to make a character that fit the world of Cyberpunk rather than looking like a cosplayer tourist in Night City. This is also just me speaking here, but I really don't like voice protagonists in RPGs with deep customization, because it feels like the developers are trying to have their cake and eat it too. What I mean by that is that making a super in-depth character to plug yourself into only for them to have a voice that doesn't fit yours at all is really jarring and disappointing. I had this exact same complaint with Fallout 4, so CD Projekt Red doesn't get a free pass, even though the voice actor for both Vs is really good. I got around this by not really plugging myself into the character that I was playing as. I wasn't me in the world of Cyberpunk, I was playing as V. Which is fine, I guess. I just wish I played as the dude on the cover rather than spend a lot of time making a character. Additionally, you better be really satisfied with how your character looks because you cannot change them after the fact. There are no barbers, tattoo parlors, or plastic surgeons to alter your appearance after you press confirm on the character creator, which is a surprising oversight in a world all about altering your appearance. There were so many instances in this game where I see interesting looking NPCs with cyberware and I wished I could look like them. After you make a character, you get to choose your life path, which is yet another underdeveloped aspect of this game. I really thought that these prologues would be much longer, or that they would impact your character's backstory more. From what I've seen, they mostly just impact dialogue choices, which is really meaningful and important to its credit. I just think the prologue chapter for all the life choices is much shorter than we were led to believe. That being said, I did enjoy the Street Kid intro, and even though it was short, it was very sweet and enjoyable to play. I do think that the Corpo storyline is easily the weakest of the three storylines. I'll go into further detail a little bit later, but of the Nomad, Street Kid, and Corpo backstories, Corpo suffers the most, which is unfortunate because it was easily the most interesting choice of the three in my opinion. Cyberpunk's story is really interesting, and it's easily the best part of this game. The way you interact with the game's characters and universe is really well done. I love how Cyberpunk takes its time with its dialogue and conversations. Characters take dramatic pauses before delivering information, and I always felt like I was actually having a conversation with them, rather than the static dialogue choices that, say, Fallout 4 offers. I never felt like the game was just waiting for the shooting to start, and I was immediately immersed and interested in the story this game was telling. I was surprised by how many slow and quiet moments there were in this game. Times where you and other characters are reflecting on past decisions or asking existential questions about what it means to be human. It fits the theme of Cyberpunk so perfectly. The cast of characters that you meet are all really fleshed out, and their voice acting performances are stellar. I would say the weakest performance probably comes from Keanu Reeves. I don't think that he's a bad actor, but he's really reliant on physical things being in front of him to work with. When he's in a mocap environment, his performance kind of suffers. If you want to see a clear example of what I mean, first watch John Wick, then watch Bill and Ted Face the Music, and you can see the difference in his performance. Overall though, I really dug Cyberpunk's story and characters, and I won't be forgetting them anytime soon. I have a little more to say regarding the first act of the game and the general tone of the story, but I'll wait to the end of the video to avoid spoilers. When it comes to a genre like Cyberpunk, the environment itself plays a huge role in the overall story, and with Cyberpunk 2077, that's no different. The game takes place in a futuristic megacity with all the grit and glamour that comes with it, and I'd say that the game executes that feeling perfectly. Night City and the Badlands surrounding it are absolutely stunning. Every building and area feels so storied and rich in lore. There's excellent attention to detail everywhere. The environment and its inhabitants all have a story to tell visually, and it's executed flawlessly in my opinion. I found myself constantly staring at the in-game ads and listening to the news broadcasts because I wanted to learn more about the day-to-day of Night City. Whenever I watched a movie like Blade Runner, I wanted to be in that world. I wanted to experience it for myself, and visually speaking, Cyberpunk nails that vibe, and I was immersed into its universe instantly. However, despite everything I just said, it kills me to say that you can't really interact with a whole lot of it. The game is littered with all sorts of street vendors and interesting NPCs, but you can't talk to them in any capacity. Most NPCs that you think would be vendors have a single line of dialogue basically telling you to fuck off, or they praise your looks. I was pretty disappointed by how empty and lifeless the world feels when it looks so energetic and full of interesting interactions. In fact, this is probably the most disappointing aspect of this game to me. Night City feels like such an empty shell. You can't play any of the arcade games or pachinko machines despite them being everywhere. There's no gambling, interactive bars or restaurants, brothels or clubs. The game teases you with all these activities and interactions and scripted quests, but ultimately doesn't deliver upon any of them when you revisit these things. Lizzie's and Clouds are set up as these next generation strip clubs and brothels, but outside of story missions you cannot interact with them at all. Which is strange because Cyberpunk 2077 advertised itself as this hypersexualized mature experience, but ultimately chickens out on that. The NPC AI is awful. They barely react to anything the player does, and when they do react to something, it's extremely delayed to an almost comical level. Remember when CD Projekt Red boasted that there would be over 1,000 unique NPCs with their own daily schedules they would follow? Well, if their schedule includes staring at a wall all day and walking down the same street, then they've nailed it. This wouldn't be that big of an issue, honestly, and I've seen people defending the NPC behavior by saying, that's how people are in real life. When you walk through a major city in like New York or Los Angeles, you can't just stop and talk to someone and expect a meaningful conversation. I get that, I understand the complaint, but I feel like people are upset because CD Projekt Red really promised unique NPCs with their own AI, rivaling what Red Dead 2 did. Now that I think of it, it's really no wonder why Night City is so crime-riddled with a police force like the Goombas presented in this game. Cyberpunk has given me a newfound appreciation for the super cops in GTA 5 because this game's crime and wanted system is absolute dog shit. You can't steal items from NPCs, and the only way to get the law on you is to murder someone in cold blood. When you do that, you automatically get a wanted level and 3 cops spawn behind you. From here, you can choose to run down the street to get rid of them, or slaughter these 3 cops, which just causes more to spawn behind you. So you kill them, which causes more cops to spawn behind you, which leads to you killing them. You get the point. There are no epic car chases through the city, your wanted level doesn't seem to have any sort of consequence, and most importantly, you get a wanted level no matter how you kill an NPC. Obviously, if you do it in a crowded city, then yes, of course the police should attack you. But it also happens if you kill some random hobo in a secluded area. I've seen a video of someone from the top of a roof of a skyscraper snipe someone and the cops were right there behind them. These cops literally just pop in right behind you as if they were invisibly following you the whole time. It's really backwards and it feels super underdeveloped. Where is the dynamic police force that becomes more active in areas that you commit the most crime in? We were told that the police force would be a major player in Cyberpunk as well, with a fully fleshed out wanted system and corrupt cops that could send powerful boss-like NPCs to collect your head. All of that is unfortunately absent in the final game. The main way to get around Night City aside from walking is driving, and Cyberpunk actually has a really great variety of cars and motorcycles to choose from. It's pretty fun to drive around at night and jam out to the various radio stations with excellent music. but unfortunately the driving is really weird. It's way too responsive to the point where I feel like I'm constantly sliding around and fighting to stay in a straight line. It really does feel like my character is drunk driving for most of the time, and on top of that, the AI for NPC drivers is not very good. They literally stick to a predetermined path and will do nothing when you try to stop them. They don't react to car accidents or even move out of the way if you block them. You can park your car in front of an NPC and they will do nothing to try to get around you. It's astonishing to me that CD Projekt Red failed to take influence from other games that do living, breathing, open world games really well. For as much as there is to criticize about Rockstar, they stay silent about their games and then drop absolute bangers on us a year after they announce them. The level of detail in a game like Red Dead 2 is insane, and if anything, a game like Cyberpunk just makes me realize how difficult it is to pull off a convincing, living, breathing world in a video game. Night City is gorgeous and dense with all sorts of things to do. It's just missing the activities and quality of life features you'd expect from a living, breathing open world game. The jobs and activities that you can do in Night City include bounties, racing, deliveries, stopping crime, and messing with the local gangs. I actually really enjoy Cyberpunk's quest design, and I do feel like there are meaningful choices to make in most missions. The game just doesn't constantly boast about it, and sometimes the payoff to your choices isn't always immediate. I was pleasantly surprised by how in-depth some of the quests were. Without giving too much away, I encountered a side activity to check up on someone in their home. I did initially, and the game told me to come back in a couple days to check on them again. I sort of lost track of time and let several in-game days pass, and when I remembered and went back to check on this person, I was met with a very different outcome to that activity. People have criticized this game's dialogue for feeling a lot like Fallout 4's, and that you really can't turn down quests. A lot of the time you're saying yes to people, and even when you're presented with the option to say no, the game slaps you with the quest anyway, which is pretty frustrating, I admit, but I disagree with the comparison to Fallout 4 solely because the writing and character dialogue in Cyberpunk 2077 is head and shoulders better. And I would also argue that the game offers you a pretty good amount of control in terms of a quest's outcome. The random crimes and progress activities are really awkward to me, because Night City never feels dynamic or truly living. It feels like areas are put on pause as soon as I leave and life resumes when I get back to them. These crimes are a perfect indication of what I'm talking about. You have things like active hostage situations where the enemies will just stand and wait until you do something. You could completely ignore that hostage for hours and hours and hours, and yet nothing will change or progress unless you walk up to it and start the encounter yourself. Which doesn't feel very dynamic now, does it? The gunplay featured in Cyberpunk 2077 is actually really cool. For a studio that hasn't really made any FPS games before, I do feel like they kind of got it right on their first try. The weaponry all feels really solid, the guns sound meaty and badass when you shoot them. And while the melee combat isn't great, I at least enjoy the fact that it's also a pretty viable way to play the game. I thoroughly enjoyed the game's quick hack features and used them way more than I initially thought I would. It adds a whole other layer to combat, and you can choose to ignore them entirely, but enemies can use it on you, which I really liked as well. The enemy AI is a bit lacking though. There were multiple instances of them just standing there and absorbing my bullets without firing back. They don't take cover that often, and I feel like most enemy groups are too small in numbers, which leads to combat encounters being a little too short. The RPG mechanics of Cyberpunk have been rightly criticized for not being the revolutionary game changer that they were being hyped up to be, but it's definitely deeper than most people think. It combines elements of popular RPGs like Skyrim and The Witcher as you use certain abilities like hacking, bladed weapons, pistols, assault rifles. You gain experience for that particular skill tree, and you earn perk points to improve yourself in whatever stat tree you'd like. You also get experience in the typical RPG way, which would be completing quests or side activities or killing enemies to increase your overall level. When you level up, you get a stat point to increase your base attributes as well as a skill point to unlock new perks in 12 individual skill trees. Admittedly, these are mostly incremental stat increases, but I always felt like leveling up actually improved my character, so it got that part right. Additionally, you also have something called street cred, which you earn by completing side activities, and they dictate the kind of weapon, armor, and jobs you can get. You can also use this to earn skill points, so there are multiple ways to improve your character, which is pretty nice. The armor that you can get is painfully mediocre, unfortunately. Obviously, I didn't go into this game expected to be fitted in a full-on power suit or anything like that. I just expected less generic clothing in the futuristic setting of 2077. I honestly felt like my character looked like a PUBG character for most of the time that I was playing this game. In a game all about style and looking really good, I felt like I looked like a clown until I got to the bomber jackets, which are admittedly really cool looking. It's no secret by now that Cyberpunk just isn't well optimized. Upon release, it ran atrociously on last-gen consoles and it chugged on a lot of PCs. Unfortunately, my rig struggled to get past 35 frames at any time, and during combat, my frame rate would tank. So I'm pretty unhappy about the footage I was able to capture for this review, but the hotfix released 2 days after made the game a lot more stable for me for the most part. I ran into a metric fuck ton of bugs, and texture pop-in was extremely common. Sure, it's no surprise that a game of this size was buggy, but I was disappointed by just how unfinished this game felt. Major systems were undercooked, and my overall immersion was kind of tainted because of it. For example, I really do feel like the wanted system I mentioned earlier is so underdeveloped because of the lack of an NPC AI. The reason why cops don't chase you down the street is because cars have a predetermined path that they need to follow. I have faith that CD Projekt Red will turn around and patch this game up, but the state that this game was released in is an absolute travesty that I guaranteed ruined a lot of people's first impressions of the game. Before I get to the end of my review and give my final verdict, I want to take a moment to talk about the story. Specifically the first act and the overall writing of the narrative, so if you haven't played Cyberpunk yet and you want to avoid spoilers, click on this part of the video to skip ahead and avoid them. The Corpo life path really sucks. It's by far the most interesting choice between the 3 origins, and yet it's the weakest and shortest one. All you do is have like 2 conversations with people at Arasaka, and then you're fired and left with nothing. How lame. In a universe about how mega corporations are monolithic and evil, it would have been an incredibly interesting diversion to take the side of the bad guys and experience corporate domination firsthand. But I'm assuming that needed to be cut to make the deadline. The first act in your relationship with Jackie felt extremely rushed. Starting off with the street kid path, you meet him in the first mission through a misunderstanding, and then a montage of all the cool shit you do together plays, which indicates the passing of time and the budding of your friendship. Which is neat, I guess, but I really wish I could have experienced that budding friendship instead. It felt a lot to me like Anthem when I would watch my character do really badass shit and killing big monsters, and I'm like, that's cool and all and really well animated. I just wish that I was doing that. I understand that it was probably cut for time, but it's still really disappointing, especially considering that Jackie dies like 2 quests later. And I feel like his death was really sad and impactful, because the friendship you do have together is pretty strong given how little it was developed. However, I think that was mostly due to Jason Hightower's outstanding performance as Jackie. And the funeral quest was really well done. It was surprisingly sincere, and had our friendship had more time to blossom, I think it would have had even more of an impact. I really do think that our friendship was meant to be further fleshed out, but that was cut for time, as was the longer prologue missions. The rest of the game's narrative is fine. I think it's hard carried by its cast of strong characters, which elevates it to excellent. For as lukewarm as I felt about Keanu Reeves' performance, Johnny Silverhand is such an interesting character in the Cyberpunk lore that I was eager to learn more about him, and getting to play as him was really great. I highly recommend watching some lore videos before you play this game because it only makes the experience better. Takamura is easily the best character in this game, and the relationship that you two have as frenemies is really interesting and dynamic. I do wish that there was more elements of corporate espionage or politics in the game though. Cyberpunk at its core is about mega corporations overtaking government and ruling over people with their own private militaries. You can tell so many interesting stories with that concept alone, and I hope that CD Projekt Red expand upon that in the future. Last thing about the story was I was pretty disappointed by how little the brain dance mechanic was used. Once again, the game teases you with these really cool features only to not let you use them outside of story missions. There's even brain dances that you can buy for yourself, but you can't use them for whatever reason. I I was hoarding them for so long before learning that they're basically worthless, and it was yet another saddening revelation of how shallow this game can be at times. There was honestly no way in hell that Cyberpunk 2077 was ever going to live up to the massive amount of hype and expectations it had. The game could have cured cancer upon its release and there'd still be massive hate threads on it. However, I've been doing some thinking, and are these people entirely wrong? It's hard to really say for me because despite everything I said in my review, I had a total blast playing this game, and I'm definitely coming back as soon as it's patched and more stable. While I feel for the people who were incredibly disappointed and I think that they have some really good criticisms, I went into Cyberpunk with the expectation of an open world RPG that I could sink a ton of hours into. I was looking for a new game to replay for years, much like Fallout New Vegas, Skyrim, or Red Dead Redemption 2, and I honestly feel like Cyberpunk delivered on that despite its rockiness at launch. Then again, it's really difficult to recommend this game in its current state. So, if you're patient and you don't mind waiting a while, then I'd definitely say wait on this one and play it when it's the complete experience because it is a great game. It's just muddled by bugs, poor optimization, and false promises. However, if you really don't mind bugs and you're eager to hop in, then I'd say Cyberpunk 2077 will definitely be worth your while. I just wouldn't play it on the base PS4 or Xbox because, yikes.
A high rate of violence and more people living below the poverty line than anywhere else.